The theme for this evening's conversation is finding an alternative way of living. Let us go into the phrase, the way of living. Before we turn to an alternative way, let us find out what we mean by the way of living and what do we actually do when we say we are living. What happens to us? The quality of our being, the quality of our consciousness, the quality of our physical structure. What happens to each one of them while we are engaged in the act of living? It seems to me that to live is to be related to the totality of life. Totality is not an abstraction. It is not a theory or an idea. It is the life that is surrounding us and life that permeates us from within. The first thing that we notice around us is the world accessible to the sense organs. The visible, the tangible, the material world of objects, innumerable variety of shapes and sizes and colors and scents and odors. So one has to relate to this objective world of matter that is individualized, that can be differentiated one from another. To relate to this world, we require a physical structure that is sensitive, alert, pliable, not heavy, sluggish, lethargic. There is a beauty in relating to the world outside of us through the eyes, through the ears, through the capacity to touch, smell, etc. So, the visible world is accessible to the senses. And are we capable of relating to this world? We may live with the objective world. We may live surrounded by the objects, man-made, and those which are not made by man, created by man, but have existed perhaps even before mankind emerged on this globe. So it seems vitally necessary that we lay the foundation of living on the physical level. This human organism that we have, marvelously complex, rich in complexity. We take it for granted but we never get acquainted with our own bodies. We may pamper them, or we may have a belief that bodies are to be suppressed, repressed, tortured in the name of religion, renunciation, etc. It is easy to be victimized by the cult of suppression, repression and denial in the name of religion, in the name of ideologies, in the name of spiritual inquiry, or be victimized by the cult of permissiveness, pampering the senses, providing them with every kind of pleasure that they constantly demand, and be slaves to the demands of the senses. If we become enslaved by the senses and their fleeting demands, ever-changing demands, ever-growing demands, then there will be no freedom to live. And if we torture the senses and deny them even the slightest pleasure that is justifiable, then we damage this extremely sensitive organism, a highly strung instrument like violin or sitar. And I think in the world these two cults prevail, they predominate. There are some who say man is born in sin, and therefore they deny pleasure. In every part of the world, in the name of religion, it has been done as a traditional approach. And there is the cult of permissiveness in affluent countries. So it seems necessary for one who is interested in finding out an alternative way of living not to be victimized by either of these cults, to have a scientific relationship first with one's own body and the senses, to get acquainted with the body, to discover the demands of the needs of the body, how much food the body needs, requires, how many intakes, how frequently, what quality, what quantity. So one has a relationship with diet which is not traditional, which is not repetitive, where you are not a passive consumer of food, but you become friendly with the body, find out, after observing the behavior of the body with various kinds of food, its reaction to vitamins, to minerals, to starch, to protein, to find that out. There's great fun when one turns to the known and gets acquainted with it, so that the known becomes the understood. There's a great difference between knowing and understanding. You may know about things without ever coming into direct contact with them. You may read about them, you may hear about them, you may accept certain things that you hear or read and live on the basis of that acceptance. Or you may reject and make that rejection the basis of your life. But this personal discovery of the known, getting acquainted with it, becoming friendly with it, responding to the needs carefully, with tenderness, with concern, I think then life has a different quality altogether. One may find out the needs about diet, one may find out the needs about exercise, find out the needs about sleeping, about clothing, and so on. So that all the senses incorporated in our structure remain healthy, alert, and sensitive. To keep the body in such a healthy condition is, I think, our first religious or spiritual responsibility. I do hope that we do not divide life into mundane and religious, and we don't look upon our bodies as something material, ignore them, dodge them, or even have contempt for them. I do hope that perverse attitude to the physical structure is no more there at the end of this century. So alternative way of living begins with a new relationship with the body, so that the eyes are vibrating with vigor when they look at an object, or when you listen to a word. All the energy travels towards the sound, receives it, is capable of interpreting it and responding to it. It is very necessary to have such alert and sensitive, capable sense organs, because the material world by which we are surrounded is ever changing. Every minute, every moment, it is changing. It's a flux of great change. That constant change going on in the material world is something fantastic. If you are inattentive for a second, you miss something. The beauty of a flower, the beauty of a bird on wings in the sky, the beauty of a sunset or sunrise, the beauty of a starlit night, etc., etc. So it seems to me the sensual equipment should be kept as efficient as possible. That is relationship. The senses are given education to relate to man-made things, the pieces of furniture in the house, the food that you buy from your shops and markets, the houses, the gadgets, electronic gadgets and so on, the cars. The people living in scientifically developed countries are very capable of relating through senses to all these things. I wonder if they realize that the man-made visible world and man-made visible structures are only a tiny particle of the totality. They are a very minor and a tiny part of the totality. There is a vast world beyond the man-made world, the visible world. The lakes, the rivers, the mountains, the trees, the birds, the animals, the earth, and the solar systems and stars. We are all related to them. Do we ever look at them, and do we live our organic relationship with nature? It's not outdoor activities for health. It's not outdoor activities only for the entertainment of the mind. One is talking about one's organic relationship to the universe that is not created by man. That visible and tangible universe. It has a beauty of its own. There you do not have to interpret anything. You do not have to compare and evaluate, but you have to relate yourself. If one can be with the trees or among the trees for some time, that perception of the trees, that contact with the trees, the communion with the trees, and being with the trees affects the inner quality of life. And I think we have created a way of living in which there is not much time for this relationship with the cosmos. We are so engrossed in the man-made world, man-made structures, the gain and loss in terms of money, the gain and loss in terms of personal pleasure or pain, and so on. We have no time for living our vital relationship with the universe. Being with river or being with lakes or oceans, just be there without any motivation of gaining anything in return. Alternative way of living will require equal importance, if not more, of this relationship with the universe and with the cosmos. I wonder if you have noticed what happens to you when you are in space. You go to the mountain top and you stand there. There is space around you. You don't see any objects, but you see the space. You see the skies. And you breathe that breeze, the mountain breeze, which brings vitality to you. And that space, the relationship with the space, invigorates you. Every nerve tingles with new energy, every drop of blood. So, as money is important for livelihood, and material objects and houses and apartments are necessary, food is necessary, I think this relationship with the sensual world, which is not created by man, but still we are part of it, is very necessary. If one realizes that importance, I think one will not need medications for psychological depressions, feeling exhausted, for curing oneself of the stress and strain. One may just return to that nature, and all the healing forces contained in the nature are waiting for us. That contact and that relationship is sacred. To me, all life is sacred. All life is divine. That which is not made by the hand of man and the thought of man is divine. So this contact with divinity, which is visible, which is tangible, which is ever-changing, which keeps you on your toes, as it were, is the foundation of a new way of living. Now, when you contact the reality, which is fleeting, changing, and that's why it is beautiful, it appears to be transitory, and yet it has the quality, that healing quality of the eternity. When you see that, we do not remain only on the perceptual level. As we were saying yesterday, these sensations get interpreted after reaching brain. They get interpreted according to the conditioning, the upbringing, the culture, the education, the temperament, and the mood of the person at that moment. And that interpretation implies that we convert the percept, that which we have seen, to an abstract idea. We give it a name, we identify it, and after identify it, we evaluate it, then we relate it to our needs, and then we react to it. All this requires time in describing, but when it happens with a terrific speed. electromagnetic speed. So, along with the percepts, there are these concepts, the theories, the ideas. We are not born blank. We bring with us a very rich heritage of human culture, of languages, of names, of values, of theories. It's a huge biological and psychological inheritance. So, the second level of living is the conceptual level of living. The senses reach out towards the visible, and the concepts, the theories, the symbols, the values, through the mind, reach out towards the invisible. We are proceeding towards the totality of life. We said to live is to relate to the totality. We began with the obvious, the visible, and now we are moving towards the invisible world, the world of values, the world of names, identifications, descriptions, definitions, theories. On the perceptual is a superstructure. Mankind has grafted on the perceptual world a superstructure of conceptual world. And the perceptual and the conceptual are interwoven together. So, we move on the conceptual level through our brains. The movement of the brain is a movement of mind, and that movement also requires that we keep our brain very clear, sharp, and attentive. As we talked about the physical structure, now we are going to the subtle part of physical structure. There is a chair here in the front row. There is a chair. If the brain is not kept, if the brain is not educated to receive the impressions, to retain them in memory, to reproduce them when necessary, if the organ, the cerebral organ, the brain, is not kept in a healthy condition, if it is not trained to handle the concepts, the theories, the symbols, etc., competently and efficiently, then the relationship will be damaged. As the senses have to be alert, the brain also has to be alert. Now what do we do to keep the brain alert and sensitive and capable of handling all this invisible material of identifications, definitions, descriptions, values, etc.? What do we do to that? About the bodies, we talked about changing the relationship with diet, exercises, sleeping, etc. Finding out the necessities and responding to them, providing them. The findings must be our own. They cannot be borrowed. Knowledge can be borrowed, but understanding cannot be borrowed. Personal encounter, personal communion can never be borrowed. It's not out of speculation. It is something you have to go through yourself. So after having seen how one educates the body and provides the needs scientifically, without becoming a pleasure mongerer or pamperer of the bodies, or without entering into torturing and suppressing. Now what do we do with the brain, which is a very sensitive? Even the doctors haven't discovered what is contained in the whole of brain. They tell us that we function through some parts of our brain. We are not exercising the whole of the brain. They have yet to find out what is contained in the frontal lobe, what is the function of the frontal lobe, etc. Apart from that, what do we do now, and how does one train the brain? Now, if we have at all observed, even for the fun of it, how we function cerebrally, we might have noticed that brain requires order. If there is chaos, the brain is very reluctant to function. If there is dirt, untidiness in the room, there is no cleanliness, there is no tidiness, and things are lying chaotically, you enter the room and you sit down to think, and the brain is reluctant to think out things clearly. It likes to be surrounded, even on the material level, by an external order and a cleanliness. I think brain does require these two things. I don't know whether cleanliness is next to godliness or is not next to godliness, but surely cleanliness and orderliness are the prerequisites of cerebral health, even on the sensual and the physical level. Now, how does one create that cleanliness and orderliness inside our lives? Outside, one may learn to keep things tidy and clean, but our minds are chaotic. Our behavior can be chaotic and very disorderly. People are likely to eat any time they like, anything they like, sleep any time they like. There is no rhythm, there is no order in their lives. So the first thing is to create an orderliness on the physical level. Before we turn to the inner, it's absolutely necessary, not for the study of yoga and spirituality, but even for our inner health, not to leave anything chaotic, anarchical. So one creates a rhythm physically. If and when that is done, these are things to be done. We are talking about finding an alternative way of living. Not the speaker finding it alone, but each one of us finding it out for oneself. We are not going to borrow it from this speaker or another speaker. We may listen to them, we may understand them, but the finding has to be undertaken by ourselves in our daily living. Then it will have the quality of life. Otherwise, there will be empty ashes. The words and ideas borrowed and carried in the basket of memory. By the time you reach home, the words have lost their grip. The meaning has lost its intensity. So, instead of borrowing, we are going to discover it for ourselves. Now, if the physical is taken care of, how do I create orderliness and cleanliness in my inner living? It will be necessary, will it not, that when I decide to do something, when I promise that I will do something, I do it actually. People sit down, indulge in wishes, desires, thoughts. I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to do that. They go on indulging speculatively or mentally, playing around with ideas, and they don't move a finger, they don't do a thing at all. And those important desires, important wishes, they go on fermenting inside. And as fermentation of food might create problems physically, this fermentation of wishes and ideas and ambitions create a kind of sickness in the brain. What one is trying to say is, one thinks about life, plans and organizes life. One sits down and finds out the priorities, decides how much time and energy is to be given to which priority and acts upon it. That creates an orderliness in life. You think something and you do something else. You want to do something and you do something else. I think this inconsistency between wanting and doing, this proliferation of ideas verbally in the mind and doing nothing on the physical level creates a kind of ill health of the brain. So one has to find out what one wants to do, how one is going to do it, and organize the day. Have a plan for the whole life. Have a plan, say, for the next 5 years or 10 years. But we have to organize the day. Because the day, the today, the now is the only concrete reality before us. It is the only eternity which we may either meet or may not meet. So, I think brain requires this promptness of action. No time lag between decisions and actions. Postponement or procrastination in decision making, procrastination in taking action makes the brain very heavy, very sluggish, and perhaps even sick to some extent. Secondly, it seems to me a chronic sickness of modern man that he listens and reads too much. There's no time to digest anything. There's no time even to understand what is heard or what is listened to. So many books, radios, wireless, televisions, talks, videos. So we go on stuffing the brain with ideas, approaches. We never find out which way we want to take. So there's a kind of confusion that comes about. There will have to be an austerity in reading or listening to talks or participating in conferences. Austerity in the sense that when I take a book, say by Ramana, Ramakrishna, Buddha, Krishnamurti, Confucius, New Testament, book on Judaism, or whatever, if I take it, it's not a novel. It's a communication of a serious person, and person is sharing life. Now, do I understand what I read? It's no question of wanting to implement in life or not. Leave that aside. But do I understand it? If I understand what I read, then what I have understood becomes mine own substance. As the food that you eat and digest becomes the substance of the physical body, in the same way, what is understood after reading becomes the substance of your being. It no more remains belonging to a Krishnamurti or a Ramana Maharshi or a Ramakrishna or XYZ. It's your own. And that understanding enriches life. That results in growth. Reading does not result in growth. Reading and listening may polish the intellect. It may enrich your vocabulary, bring about a flair in your speech. You can impress people. But as far as the growth is concerned, I think it doesn't take place because we hear so much, we read so much, we understand so little. So there will have to be an austerity. The reading will have to be undertaken for the sake of learning and understanding rather than absorbing ideas, acquiring ideas, owning them. I know what is Hinduism, I know what is Theosophy, I know what is Buddhism, I know what Zen Buddhism. This knowing and collection of things makes the brain very heavy. But if reading is undertaken or listening is undertaken with the view to learn, that learning and understanding keeps the brain very elegant, very light, and equipped with sensitivity. So it seems to me this cerebral order, already we have to do our jobs, we have to live in this mechanized civilization where so much information has to be fed into the brain. We can't escape it. We have to go through so many experiences that condition us. So we need not add to that burden. So when we read, when we listen, we participate, let us be very clear that we understand it. We relate it to our life. We relate it to our needs. And through that correlation and understanding, then there is maturity of growth. So, along with non-procrastination, promptness of decision and action, there has to be this austerity in cerebral activities. Thirdly, the health of brain requires that there is a consistency or a harmony between the motivation, the speech, and the action. Our present way of living does not make it obligatory upon us to discover whether there is a contradiction between motivation and speech and action, or there is a harmony. Now we have to find out what is the relationship between my motives and my words, my speech. There is so much hypocrisy, there is so much pretension, there is so much artificiality, that the simplicity, the elegance of simplicity, this harmony between the three is not there. And therefore the brain becomes dull. It has this escape of pretension. It knows it can escape into excuses, justifications, pretensions. We cannot go into all the details, but I think this orderliness and cleanliness of the brain is something one has to pay attention to. Now, the brain contains, all the brain cells contain this conditioned energy which we call thought, the thought energy, which we call knowledge, memory, or experience. It has a tremendous momentum. So, finding out an alternative way of living requires a first-hand acquaintance with the mechanism of mind, the anatomy of mind, as it were, the chemistry of thoughts and emotions, what a thought does to us, or what the freedom from thought does to us. Now that can be done if I or you watch what happens actually when a thought is born. I wonder if we have watched that way. When a thought is born, how it releases attention, how the thought gets clothed into a word, the word gets a sound, how they travel together. The meaning of the thought and the sound of the word, they travel together, they come to the throat and they explode through the mouth. This journey of thought and sound through the body is something fantastically interesting. And how the process of breathing helps the journey of thought upward, bringing it out through the mouth. This is not the evening, again, to probe into the issue of how the thought gets clothed in sound, etc. But suffice it to say that as soon as a thought or an emotion is born or stimulated inside, it has pressures or tensions immediately. Let us watch the movement of any desire, any wish. Watch the movement of jealousy, which is so common among us, envy or jealousy. You are more beautiful than I am. You are richer than I am. You have more beautiful wife or husband than I have. We always go on comparing. Jealousy, what does it do? Fear, our common experience. Have you noticed how the body, the organs of the body begin to shrink before the onslaught of fear? Or you have anger, and how the contraction takes place immediately in the temples, in the eyes, the throat, and so on. So the movement of thought, the movement of mind affects the body. And this movement, which we call the movement of mind, is our channel. It is through which we relate to the invisible world of man-made structures. We relate to relationships created by society. Now this mind, this momentum of the mind, the habits contained in the mind have a grip on us. We enter into relationships according to our conditioning, our habit patterns, etc. And this way of relationship has not helped us up till now, has not helped the mankind to create a society which is based on love or freedom or friendship or peace. We are still violent. There is a barbarian at the core of our being. We are assertive. We are aggressive. We are violent. We may talk about peace and talk about freedom, etc., equality. But we have this whole thought structure. The movement of the me, which is the center of the thought structure, seems to be an assertive and aggressive entity. It seems to be an acquisitive entity. So whenever it moves to acquire, to own, to possess, to protect what it possesses, etc. So when it moves, there is the desire for acquisition, there is the fear that it may not be able to acquire, and there is the defensiveness to protect what it has already possessed. This acquisitive tendency, this separativeness or divisiveness is the root of violence, is the root of conflicts, is the root of many a misery and suffering. But we do not know how to function otherwise. When we move in life, we move through the mind. And we move through the mind means we move through the me, the I, the ego, the self. And the very movement of the self, which is the movement of the total human past, is conditioned to be acquisitive, is conditioned to go on the defensive, is conditioned to be inhibited by the urge for security and so on. Now, we want to retain that as the source of our perception. We want to retain that as the controller, regulator, etc. of relationships, and yet we want peace and love and unity. We want peace and love and, this is impossible. Through the center of the me, the self, the ego, there never could be and shall be love, peace or freedom in the life of an individual or in the life of the total human race. We have to find out if there is an alternative way of living, that is to say, whether it is possible to move not from the center of the me, but the center going into total abeyance and functioning from a psyche which has no center and no circumference. That psychic exploration is the historical need of the time. We cannot create an alternative way of living as long as we accept the authority of the me and the ego. We accept the authority of the mind. A few years ago, the speaker was traveling through Yugoslavia, addressing various universities in that country, and had some important discussions with the leaders of the country. And a question was asked. I asked a question to one of the leaders, why there was not a change in the quality of consciousness, why I did not notice any change in the relationship with money, with ownership. In that country, though the country had gone through a revolution in 1948, I was visiting years and years after that revolution. And the leader was an honest person. He said, look, we were under the impression that when we change the outer structure, the economic, the political structure, etc., when we decentralize administration and have commune system, the consciousness will change, but it has not happened. The relationship to money had not changed, to ownership had not changed. I could say it about other countries too, but that was my personal study, because one spent months in Yugoslavia, as one was invited there to visit and speak at different universities on the frontiers of mind and brain. So, the center, the me, the ego, you can have a collective ego. We are the Indians, the Americans, we are the Hindus, we are the Jews, we are the Muslims, the Arabs. You have a collective ego and you have an individual ego. That ego is the source of all divisive, separative, fragmentary activities. We want to retain that. And yet, we want freedom from violence and fragmentation. And in all humility, let me tell you that as long as that authority is there, and this groove of functioning through the ego is there, there will be no ending to violence or wars. Well, still one has to say that for the relationship with the invisible world of sentiments, emotions, thoughts, ideas, you have to use the brain and the mind, and one has to learn and educate oneself in handling all this inheritance very competently. As the senses have to handle the relationship with the objects, the mind has to relate itself and relate itself to the invisible world and handle the thought structure, the knowledge, the memory. We cannot do away with the ego, we cannot destroy it. It is to be there. It is the authority of that which has to come to an end. May I put it in other words, that the movement of thought, the movement of I consciousness is relevant when we are relating to man-made structures and objects. For example, I have to drive a car. I learned driving a car. I learn, then I practice. And that memory is there in me. So, the me, with the help of the body, handles the car. The reflexes are trained. So, car is a finite object. It does not change its behavior. Today, tomorrow, or 10 years, it's the same car. So with a finished product, when you have to deal with a finished product, this thought structure, which is storehouse of memory and experience and talents, is very useful. So that has to be done. But when you transfer the authority of the ego to human relationships and relationship with that which is beyond the invisible, relationship with the infinite or the eternal, then the trouble begins. The alternative way of living is using the thought, using the brain, using the knowledge memory in the material world. Also using it when you are dealing with social sciences like economy, politics, etc. Very elegantly using memory, using experience. All that is to be done there. But when you turn to human relationship, then this acquisitiveness, this going on the defensive, this separativeness or divisiveness has to come to an end, and a new source of perception and response has to come into existence. Without the ending of fear in us and without the desire for always being on the defensive coming to an end, I do not think there will be any relationship worth the name. So I have to come to my last point, that human beings have one part conditioned, and they have to their being other parts that are not conditioned, that have not been conditioned. Human beings have tremendous potential. For example, love has not been conditioned. I am not talking of attachment, infatuations, addictions. They have nothing to do with love. I am talking about love, which is a movement of egolessness, which neither knows me and the not me, which is a qualitatively different movement of joy, which is beyond ego, beyond pleasure or pain. Human beings have tremendous potential. Now when you and I come together and we have to relate to each other, I cannot say that I know what you are totally, and perhaps you cannot say that you know me totally. You can know a finished product which does not grow, which does not change, but human beings can grow and change every minute. So, human beings are different. They have limitless potential. That's why we say they are parts of divinity. They are organically related to the divine. In order to be related to you, I require a freedom from my experience of yesterday. Supposing we meet and I say something which hurts you, and we meet again the next day. If you have the memory of the hurt, that memory of the hurt looks through your eyes towards me. I may have changed. I had hurt in one moment of stupidity, or because I was under great stress or strain, I had behaved. But I may have changed. You carry the grudge which has been nursed in 24 hours. So you and I cannot meet. If I do the same unto you, we cannot meet. You say something that gives me pleasure. I carry the memory of that pleasure. So next day when we meet, that memory comes up and says, oh, this fellow, this person has been very appreciative and had pleased me. Now let me secure his goodwill today. The relationship becomes a means to an end. It is conditioned by the memory. And maybe your opinion has changed today. I was trying to cultivate your friendship so that you please me again, to secure that pleasure. You might have changed. What I am trying to say is, getting stuck up in the memory of one yesterday or 10,000 yesterdays creates inhibitions. So the authority of memory is not the right way of living. One has to be free of that memory, of pleasure and pain. Then only you can look at the person, look at the totality, meet the person in a new way. I think our present way of living creates inhibitions as we live. With every person, some kind or other of inhibition. We get attached to some, we get repulsed about some, we are afraid of some, we depend upon some. Our reactions, our relationships are governed by the authority of memory, the authority of value structure. What you have done is wrong because my book says that it is wrong. So I am trying to measure you according to the book written somewhere in India by someone 100,000 years ago. I am not looking at you. I am not listening to you. I am with the book. And I am measuring you according to the book. The relationship based on thought, relationship based on ideas, or on the authority of experience has never the freshness. It hasn't got the life, hasn't got dynamism. So an alternative way of living is necessary, where the me with all its storehouse of memory and experience goes into non-action, and you are left in the nudity, the nakedness of consciousness, which meets, which listens, which looks, which understands, and then responds out of understanding. The theme, the subject was vast, an alternative way of living. I have not tackled it on the collective level. How does the world get rid of wars and nuclear wars? And how do we create an alternative society, alternative social structures? I have not taken that. I have tackled the issue today on the individual level. How can an individual create an alternative way of living? On the sensual, on the physical level, on the psychological level, so that there is a freedom inside him to perceive things differently, respond differently. And when individual changes, when the quality of individual perception and responses change, then such individuals can come together and create a new society. Till then, what the leaders are doing, political and other leaders are doing, we have to console ourselves with what they are doing. They are postponing wars. They are not creating peace. It implies that there should be a society free of exploitation, socio-economic, political structures not based on exploitation. Unless there is an end to the exploitative systems, there cannot be peace in the world. But that was not the issue today. How to get rid of violence? You cannot get rid of violence only through treaties and agreements. They have very restricted utility, those treaties and agreements. What is necessary is the sanction to violence in the mind of each individual has to come to an end. We carry those sanction to violence in us, dealing in our daily relationship I get angry when I want to get things quickly done. I think anger gets it done. Scold and I get things done. I beat my children, wife or husband, and get things done. So I have a sanction. Unless human beings come together, pool their resources together and say we must resolve our problems individually or collectively without violence, there cannot be an end to violence. But that's a different issue altogether. What is alternative way of applying science and technology? What is an alternative economy for peace? Politics for peace? What is an alternative educational system for peace? All these are very grave issues, and I don't think, rather I did not think, that the organizers had in their mind that we should tackle them on the global scale pertaining to the economic, political, or educational issues. They can be tackled, but in 1 hour you cannot tackle the individual and the collective both. So we focused our attention on the individual, living with the visible, the invisible, and the infinite, the physical, the psychological, and the trans-psychological. And I think I should conclude by saying that the coexistence with computers, coexistence with robots is a very great compulsion for us to find out if there is any other way of functioning and relating than the way of operating through knowledge and memory, through brain which moves only mechanistically, which acquires, which stores, and which reproduces. This cerebral way is a mechanistic way, repetitive way. So the challenge is to find out if we can be original, where we can be creative in our relationships, fresh, and our responses can be personal, not only expressions of the collective that has been fed into our brain. That is the challenge, and every serious or sensitive citizen of the world, I think, feels that compulsion. Knowledge has lost all its glow. With the computers and electronic brains doing things even better sometimes than the brain does. So what is beyond brain? Is there any other dimension than the dimension of knowledge? Is a very pertinent question. Not only academic or theoretical, but a question of life and death for a modern man. Thank you for your attention. I think we may have a break for a few minutes before we gather again for question-answer session. Thank you.
The written questions may be submitted to him or
Being submitted. First one is, can a human being be balanced?
Be
Balanced. Second one, is there a place in your or our thinking for nurturing the uniqueness of the individual by oneself and society, without being egotistical and without rejecting the sense of oneness with the human beings in the universe? And the rest now?
2 questions.
That's me. Okay. Third one, what approach to food can we take which will allow us to discover the foods or the things which will nourish us most helpfully? Trial and error, right?
Can a human being be balanced? That's the first question. Why does such a question arise? Does it imply that we have accepted imbalance as a way of living? Obviously, the questioner is not referring to the physical balance, that one carries oneself physically in a balanced way when one walks, one stands up or one runs. That seems to be taken for granted, that the behavior of the physical structure with an innate and organic balance is the way of living. But maybe the questioner is referring to the psychological behavior. Behavior of the mind. The behavior of the mind tends to become imbalanced every second moment. Something happens which does not please me, and I get displeased. I see someone, I don't like him or her, or I positively dislike. That dislike creates an imbalance. So I get angry. Anger creates an imbalance. And when that anger is allowed to stay on by justifying it or defending it as a natural way of behavior, then the imbalance crystallizes in the system and becomes a permanent inhibition or an obsession, and so on. So the question boils down to this: is it possible to move into relationships where there is a duality of pleasure and pain, honor and humiliation, sorrow and joy, birth and death, etc.? Is it possible to retain an inner equipoise? The equipoise is an alternative way of living, and getting imbalanced and carrying the toxins, carrying the toxins of crystallized imbalances is our present way of living. Now we who are the questioners now, we take it up. It does not belong to any individual anymore. We have taken it up as an impersonal question, and we are asking ourselves, why does one get imbalanced? Balance cannot be created, but it is possible that one can get rid of imbalance by understanding what it is and why it is there. It is not, that imbalance is not something physical. It's not a stone in your path that you can lift and throw it away. It is something that is happening on the mental level, has only existence in the nervous system and the chemistry of the body. So it has to be tackled with the help of words and personal observation. It has to be tackled through understanding. How do you get rid of falsehood? You investigate verbally. You understand what is falsehood. And understanding of the falsehood, the nature of the falsehood, sets you free of the grip of falsehood on you. There is no other way to get rid of falsehood except to understand what is the truth. The understanding of truth liberates you from the grip of falsehood. The understanding of freedom liberates you from the grip of bondage. So understanding is the only way of setting ourselves free of imbalances. There is no trick, there is no technique, method. We are not talking about therapies, psychological therapies. We are talking about something deeper than the psychic or psychological therapies to cure a person of temporary disorder. We are talking of something which is rooted in the source of our perception, exploring if we can be unconditionally free of that. So, what gets upset, what gets hurt, and leads to the stimulation of an imbalance? If I come here to your gathering, where most of you do not know me personally, even the organizers did not know me, and the family that has offered me their hospitality had not met me. So we are really strangers to one another. If I come here carrying an image of myself, that I am a religious person or I am a spiritual person, and I expect from you a kind of behavior, expect from you that you recognize that image of the religious or the spiritual person, then there is a possibility of getting hurt. You may not feel that there is a religious person or a spiritual person. You don't know what kind of image I am carrying about myself. So your responses are different. And then I feel, oh, well, they do not recognize me as a religious or a spiritual celebrity or, speaker or this or that. If I carry an image about myself, there is a possibility of getting hurt. If I carry an expectation in my mind of specific responses from you, it is quite possible that the expectation is not fulfilled and then I get disappointed. Or if I am expecting agreement from you to whatever I say here, I am sharing as a friend. You may agree, you may not agree. There is no question of agreement, disagreement, acceptance, rejection. There is the question of sharing. Now, supposing I am expecting agreement and you disagree, then again there is an imbalance. So, the causes of imbalance are deep within me, of creating an image about myself, carrying expectations about you and from you, expectations about agreements, etc. So, doesn't it indicate, this is a question and we are dealing with it as briefly as possible, does it not indicate that there could be an alternative way of living where you do not create an image about yourself in any manner whatsoever? You live. If you are an artist, if you're a musician, you sing. And the act of singing is its own fulfillment. If you love to share and people are gracious enough to come and listen to you, you feel fulfilled in the act of sharing. No image created about yourself. Then will there be any possibility of getting hurt or wounded? Or carrying the hurt and wound in such a way that creates an imbalance? Please do see this. We are all the time busy building up images about ourselves, accepting the images of other people about us. Many of you might have heard the name of a great spiritual teacher called J. Krishnamurti. Many of you might have heard the name. Once he was in Italy and went for a walk. He must have driven outside Rome a few miles and then got out of his car and started walking. He had a couple of friends with him, and while they're walking, a farmer and his wife, very simple people from the village, they were coming from the other side. And they came near Krishnamurti. They did not obviously know who the person was. They looked at him and asked him, "Sir, may we walk with you for a few minutes?" And he agreed. And the farmer and his wife walking on both sides of Krishnamurti for a few steps, perhaps, few minutes, and they bid goodbye. They were so happy. They were nearly in ecstasy, without a word, did not talk. And when the farmer and his wife left, the friend turned to Krishnamurti and said, "I have been with you for 50 years. I have never felt the kind of ecstasy that couple experienced. I could see what was happening to them. And I have been with you for 50 years. It never happened to me." Krishnamurti stopped and he said, "Did you ever look at me? Or were you looking at that legendary figure called J. Krishnamurti, taken up by the Theosophist and trained as the world teacher or the master? You were looking at the image that you had accepted. You never looked at me." You see, to look at a person without an image, to look at yourself without having an image about yourself is something very rare. This is our preoccupation. Building up images, accepting from others, creating images about others. So in our relationships, the images come into contact with each other. They hit each other, they come into clash, and then there is pain, then there is misery, suffering, and imbalances. So not to be preoccupied with this image-making business is one way, perhaps, to get rid of imbalance. And secondly, in every relationship, to uncover one's own being. Everyone has a being, a beingness. And I'm not talking only of the mind and the body, the beauty of the mind or the efficiency of the brain. I'm not talking about those things. Behind them beneath them, along with them. There is a quality, a non-verbal quality of our beingness. Not what we have become, an artist, a doctor, an engineer, a teacher, not that. That which has never been polluted by the process of becoming, never been contaminated by the efforts at becoming someone else than what we are. We have that part of our being also. So, if one can remain and relate without building up images, one can be free of imbalances. And secondly, in relationship, if we can be psychologically without expectations from others, if the act of expressing becomes its own fulfillment and you do not want anything in return, I'm talking about psychological relationship. If you are working in an office and you are the boss and you have assistants, you will expect work from them. You are a teacher, you will expect that the students listen to you and work with you. I'm not talking about that. But human relationship at the level of family, at the level of society, the national level, the global level, and so on. Can we be psychologically free of expectations? Expectation that you should accept me, you should appreciate me, you should recognize me, you should have good opinion about me. Can we be free of those expectations? If I have those expectations, I will be maneuvering my behavior or the behavior of the other person to produce an expected result. So there will not be the spontaneity of movement. There will not be a first-hand relationship, but a maneuvered relationship based on the expectations. So imbalances can disappear if you can move freely as you are, with the elegance of your being, without expecting acknowledgement, appreciation, etc. from the other people. Come what may, you act choicelessly what you understand. You act what you love to do. So, I think if the movement of relationship becomes a movement of your total being, and not the partial, fragmentary movement of that petty little ego, then there will be a new equipoise, a dignity to the being. Let us quickly turn to another aspect which perhaps I had referred to yesterday. One had referred to what the totality of life is. Life has motion and motionlessness. Life has movement and movement freeness. Life has sound and sound freeness. Life has relationships and aloneness. These are dimensions. They together constitute the totality. There will be imbalance if you get attached to the movement and ignore the motionlessness. If you get attached to the stillness or motionlessness and ignore the movement, there will be imbalance. So imbalance can be eliminated, and there can be the dignity of an inner balance if one is aware that aloneness and relationship both are equally important. Silence and speech both are equally important to life. One has to get acquainted with them and live in them. Thirdly, also that part was taken up yesterday evening, that the world of symbols, concepts and theories is very important, as the world of material objects is important. But to understand the limitations of the symbols, that they are relatively real, is necessary. You do not mistaken the symbol for reality. You do not mistaken the psychological time for the time-free eternity of life. To understand the symbols as the relatively real and having relative utility, if we do that about each symbol that we use, the arithmetical numbers, they have no reality. We have created them. There are not numbers in universe, in life. We have created 1 to 9. We have arbitrarily decided the relationship between the numbers, and we play the game. We have to use them. We use the notes of music. We use so many symbols, even the words. The word is not the thing, but for communication you use the words. If we are aware that the word is not the thing, the symbol is not the reality, then we are aware of the reality and we can handle the symbols at the same time. So there is an inner balance. I must stop. The question of balance, is it possible? Can man live with unbalance? Presumes that imbalance is the way of living, and it seems to be so. Let us discover. The speaker says it is possible to live and move with hundreds and thousands of people, to be in relation with hundreds, relationship with hundreds, without generating toxins of or impurities of imbalances. There was a question about food, and I don't think really one can generalize about it. One has to find out what kind of climate one is living in, what is the physical condition, the hereditary idiosyncrasies of each body. One has to find out kind of occupation that one has. But one could only say this much, that by the time the whole bone structure evolves and stabilizes, say by the age of 30 or 35, or in tropical countries by the age of 25, then the kind of food that is necessary is the food which contains high protein and low starch. Children need a lot of starch, proteins, minerals, etc. But after the age of 35, for the conservation of neurological and chemical energy, it's better that a person turns to fresh vegetables, fruits, nuts, not any fermented food, not highly spiced food, etc. As long as one can live by cereals, vegetables, fruits, etc., it seems culturally necessary that one avoids eating food which has been prepared by killing animals or birds. Well, where it is not possible to have fruits, vegetables, cereals, nuts, etc., people living in Antarctica, Arctic areas, they will have to eat meat. I think their eating meat is as good as any vegetarian food, because it's a compulsion there. So, if the killing is not involved, any violence is not involved. I know there is violence even in cutting vegetables. I know that. Bacteria, even if you take yogurt or milk, one cannot reduce it. Reductio ad absurdum. But there is a limit that one can put. So it seems agreeable that one avoids food prepared through killing animals or birds as far as possible. More than the quantity of food, it seems necessary to have a rhythm where one does not take meals at night. I do not know about allopathy, but one is acquainted with the Indian medical system, the herbal system, the naturopathy, and the whole approach to medicine and health. The science of yoga and the science of Ayurveda, the Indian medicinal system, both say that all the organs in the body are receptive to food between sunrise and sunset. They are open, they are